You ever notice how some folks talk about poverty like it is just about money? Like if you could hand somebody a check, that problems are just going to disappear. But many people don't stop and ask what's actually underneath that. Like, how did people get there? Why do they stay there? And what would it really take to get someone out? In this episode, me and my friend Ethan Bricker dig into it. Not with some polished feel good charity talk, but the kind of honesty that stings a little bit, but also might be healing something if you let it. We talk about poverty like it really is. Sometimes it's bad luck. Sometimes it's a broken system. And sometimes it's a mindset that gets passed down like a family recipe for fear and survival. And look, we all have a part to play. As society, as neighbors, as people of faith, we got to wrestle with how to respond. Not just throwing money at the problem, but leaning into and cultivating real stewardship. The kind that says, we've been given something, and we're responsible in how we use it, not just for ourselves, but for each other. You'll hear stories about folks trying to walk out community, not perfectly, but honestly, and people sharing what they've got, asking hard questions, learning how to help without turning it into some power game. We talk about generosity, burnout, boundaries, and what happens when love isn't backed by wisdom. And look, it's no secret we're living in a time where everybody is shouting, nobody's listening, everything's political, everybody's offended, and it feels like you have to pick a side just to say something. But somewhere in all that noise, there has to still be room for honest questions and maybe even a shot at understanding each other. Not by watering down the truth, but learning how to carry it with both conviction and compassion. Truth doesn't bend to opinion, it just is. And the pursuit of truth, at its best, is a pursuit of justice. And I mean real justice. That's not about punishment or settling scores or vengeance. That's about reclamation, about reconciliation, about transcendence and redemption. And it's about returning what was lost or raising up what was broken into something higher. Obviously, we live in a world that's shaped by human nature, and so it's messy, it's limited, it's full of a lot of trade-offs. So we walk that tightrope in this conversation. We aim high, trying to walk humbly, but that's the tension this conversation tries to hold. So if you're someone who wrestles with those kind of questions and you're trying to do that without losing sight of people in the middle, this one's for you. Welcome to the map.
2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff.
I'm glad that you jumped on. Me and you were kind of going back and forth, and there was a guy who I'm great friends with and kind of discipling. He reached out to me with a question. It was kind of a funny question. So me and him both are in like the Medicare and ACA space, and we deal a lot of times with a lot of low income people and trying to guide them through that space. And he just says, he basically said like, "Hey, I'm reading through James, and I just want to know, like, do you think that people in poverty now are worse than people who are in poverty in that time? Because like in James, there's this instruction about taking care of people who are poor, and
Yeah.
he's like, because he's like, just the people I deal with now are so despicable." And so I was like, okay, well, it's an interesting question, and my parents they've ran a ministry that was basically like a food pantry, and they deliver. It's like kind of like a Meals on Wheels as well. On the weekends, they deliver meals. It's oftentimes the older people who are financially deprived, but then they have a food pantry where people come in, hygiene products, clothes. They get backpacks away to like school kids and stuff like that, and that's a year-round thing. And so then I asked my dad the question. I'm like, "What do you think?" And my dad just kind of said, "Well, you of course always want to have safety nets in place to protect people, but his observation now, after doing this for about 20 years, is they started servicing and helping people, and then their kids started coming, and then the children of those people started coming. So now they're into three generations of poverty." And so we just had this whole conversation around poverty as a circumstance, but then poverty as a mindset. And then within like the biblical narrative, at that time, human nature is human nature. I'm sure there were swindlers who like, there's this movie called Trading Places with Eddie Murphy and Aykroyd. Have you ever seen that movie?
No, I don't think I've seen that one.
It's from
Maybe
the
I
eight.
have.
It's from the 80s. You would enjoy it. It's a comedy film, but basically Dan Aykroyd works on Wall Street. Eddie Murphy is just this street guy. He's kind of a swindler, and so he was like acting like he was blind, but also like he had no legs. So he's sitting on this box of wheels. He's like yelling, and then the cops just come and they grab him by the arms and pick him up, and then his legs drop, and he's like, "Oh my God, I have legs!" And he takes his glasses. I can see. Praise the Lord! And then he just like took off running.
Yeah.
But in the film, the partners in this like firm end up pushing Dan Aykroyd out, and then they had a bet with each other that anybody could do his job, and so they get Eddie Murphy in there, and then they groom him and turn him into this really successful.
It's like a comedy
businessman.
of the pursuit of happiness with Will Smith. That's what you're describing right now.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's a good film, but it kind of highlights that point of like people are people, and like the rich people are like swindling people,
Yeah.
and then he's swindling people. But anyways, yeah, I kind of just like went back and forth with Derek on it on the principle of like that it is like a little bit subjective, because we see the person of Jesus actually rebuking people after he's like, the crowd starts following him, and he's like literally saying, the only reason you guys are showing up is just to get resources from me. And it's not that I have a problem with like giving you food to eat. It's just that that's not the highest priority. There's a list of priorities, and there's a priority about your well-being and your soul and your spirit, and then I'm trying to feed that part of you, and you're not consuming that. All you want to consume is bread and fish, and it's going to be an issue. And then when whenever there's this extravagant act where the lady breaks the perfume bottle, which is like about a year's wage, that kind of perfume, Judas, who was already like laundering
Who's
money,
already poor. He's poor in mindset. That's that poverty mindset. Yeah.
Yeah, but people like just kind of like throw it out there that Judas was probably like already like embezzling money from the funds anyways, but he was like, "Oh, we could have took this money and used it for the poor," and Jesus said like, poverty is always going to be a thing. Like you're not actually ever going to get rid of poverty. And so, this begs the question, did he mean like circumstantial poverty? Did he mean like the spirit of poverty, the mindset that kind of feeds into that makes it generational? Or did he mean both? I don't know, but I'd love to kind of hear your, I know I threw a lot at you, but your hot take on that.
No, I've got a few like thoughts on that. I mean, so like as a pastor, what I have seen, and honestly, I think the reason why so many pastors get kind of jaded pretty quickly is they see how people kind of take advantage of the resources of the church or their brothers and sisters. And this is just my experience, so I'm only speaking for me, but I've seen people come into the church and say, we can't pay our rent, we can't pay our utilities, we're going to be homeless if we don't pay our rent. And then we step up to help and assist with that rent, and then a few weeks later we find out that person just went and bought Brandon Lake tickets, and and they're like, we're going to Little Caesars Arena here, and then there's other circumstances where it's kind of like a repeat thing, where it's like where I've seen people, they talk about going to this church and then they get some help, and then eventually the pastor says, I'm not going to keep helping you. So they change churches and they do the same thing. Then they change churches and they do the same thing. And then they come to me and they're like, yeah, I went to this church. They wouldn't help us out. Like they helped us a few times, but they won't help us anymore. And there is this like, kind of this, like, it's what you're talking about. It's this repeat cycle of poverty, of this mindset of just not stewarding finances well. And that I don't necessarily equate that to just this person's an idiot and they're just trying to be difficult, they're trying to be a leech. I definitely don't think that's the case. I think that a lot of people don't have mothers and fathers who have taught them how to steward their finances well. They've not been in a culture where the idea of savings or emergency fund or anything like that is even on the radar for them. But I've seen people just live in the cycle. So like one of the things we started doing as a church is, if we are going to help you pay a bill, you're part of our church. That's kind of a big thing too for us, is it's like you need to be part of our community, because it's kind of that Acts 4 thing of like, we hold all things in common for those who are in common with us. Like if you are in common with us in the sense that you're going after the same goal, you're here part of this community, you're being discipled, you're being equipped, you're also being corrected and trained up in righteousness. That's kind of the thing where we say, okay, we're going to help you with this, but we're also going to give you this Dave Ramsey Total Money Makeover book. And the next time you come in and I just tell people, hey, the next time you come and ask me for money, I'm going to ask, did you go through this whole book with your spouse? Are you guys actually budgeting? Are you know what I mean? Because for me, it's like, it's good to give, to be generous. It's good to help, but it's what's better is to teach people how to handle their finances well. But like our biblical theology professor this week actually said this, and was like, man, that's so helpful. He was talking about how when Jesus says help the poor, or James talks about helping the poor, and there's that Matthew 25, I was thirsty, you gave me drink, I was naked, you gave me clothes, I was in jail, you visited me, those different things. There's an expectation that the good news is also being preached as well within that context. And so like my biblical theology professor said, helping someone's great, but filling somebody's bank account doesn't actually help their soul. And there is kind of this level of like, great, you filled somebody's bank account, but money is temporary. Money is going to be here and then it's going to be gone. You're going to spend it and it'll be gone. Like, so it's great, you can help somebody for a moment, but what's better is to lead someone out of poverty and into a mindset or a life of being able to steward their resources well. And I think part of that starts with the gospel, for me, and the idea of like, yes, 100%. If you were hungry or you were thirsty, of course, it's no questions asked, you were going to get help. However, there's also that you're going to be hungry tomorrow. You're going to be thirsty tomorrow. What I want is for you to experience the bread and the wine that doesn't ever run out. That's what I want you to experience. If you can experience that, that's number one priority. And I think sometimes we rank like our fleshly, desires and wants and needs first. And I think it's got to be the gospel first. Then it's got to move into those basic needs. And then it's a question of what do we have in how are we living in common? You know what I mean? I heard this too. A pastor was talking about planting a church recently, and he was asking this other pastor to come over and help them plant a church. And he said, what's the package? Like, what's the benefits package? What's the salary? Those things. And he said, well, you'll sleep on my couch, and if I'm hungry, you'll be hungry, but if I'm full, you'll be full. And I loved that statement of just like, everything will be in common between us. If you're with us, if you'll be eating what I'm eating, if I'm hungry, you'll be hungry. If I'm full, you'll be full. And I do think that there's a lack in the Christian community of commonality together. And I think that's where it's like, but commonality only works when you're not coming into the culture thinking, what am I going to get out of this? Not what can I contribute to this?
Yeah. Well, I think you have like people who are givers and people who are takers, in like just kind of like generalizing, they gravitate towards that. And what you're kind of hitting on is the institution of Christianity. Like when we form, like, okay, we're gonna have a building and we're gonna meet here and do that. It in America, it's very much like from a consumer mindset, which we've heard that like countless times, but it is literally like, what can I get out of this? And so I've heard people, there's people who have businesses where literally they just do that. They audit churches and they teach them how to be more attractive and like where are your deficits. And like, it is like in the same way how like somebody who is wants to make music and they consider them an artist and they start working with a record company, you're still producing music, but the record company's like, so the product sold, blah blah blah. What do you mean the product? These are my songs. This is like
Yeah.
something I poured myself into. And so there's this weird like kind of um overlap there. And I think like when you have a group of people who are pursuing uh, a mission or a vision to like the city or wherever they're at, that you commoditize the people who you're trying to reach as well. So it's kind of like a two-way street of like how
Yeah.
many people can we feed and how many people can we lead to. So you're commoditizing people, but then your institution becomes the commodity. And so being able to break that mindset really, yeah, to your point, is do we have relationship with each other? And I think like if you, and I've heard this saying, I'll probably butcher it, but it's basically like every young person, if they have a good heart, should be a communist. But when you get older, if you have a brain between your ears, you'll be support free trade. And the idea is just that in theory, it all makes sense to like you want to help people and you want to have generosity, like abundance of generosity in your heart to help people who have need. But as you get older, you understand human nature, and there has to be like it's a game of trade offs, and there has to be some conditional elements to
Yeah.
that to be able to help people. And again, when we're talking about in there's like text about when you harvest from your field, like leave a little bit in the corner of the border. So
Yeah,
like,
you leave the whole border around the outside.
so
Yeah.
so to your point, we're talking about people literally having like sustenance to like not die versus like we when we say poverty now, we're talking about an income level.
Yes.
And so there's a difference of extreme poverty where people do not have the basic needs they need to sustain their body to function and live, and they will die if they don't have them, versus like I am not at the income level of a class system. So the lower, the middle, and the upper class. And when I was in Mozambique, I had like I don't know, like 600-700 international students there, and then they had like 300-400 local pastors, and they were asking the Western people or the international students like, "Do you have a house? How many cars does your family have? Like all this stuff." And we were like, you put your hand up, is this many, this many, and then they switched and they said, "Raise your hand if you had a family member who's died from starvation. Raise your hand if you have a family member who's died from thirst." And like over half of the pastors raised their hand when they asked these questions, and it was all on purpose to just make us aware of a lot of cheap stuff that we say in the West, and especially within like prosperity circles. That stuff doesn't work when you're in the poorest places in the world, when you're in like under suppressive regimes, etc. Like this country is a money making mechanism. That's why it created some of the greatest wealth that the world has ever known, is because it's a money making mechanism, and we become very centered around that. But if I don't have a relationship with the person who's giving me the money, and that person doesn't have oversight on how I'm spending it, then it becomes like there's a huge disconnect, and it's like a just like a piggy bank that I can just like an infinite piggy bank. But if people have okay, Ethan has given me X amount of funds and Ethan has oversight on how I'm spending them funds, now I have a relationship with where the funds are coming directly, and now I have a responsibility. What you were kind of alluding to earlier.
You got right into it.
Yeah.
Responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so that was the kind of the thing is I think I think the majority of your listeners are maybe Christians. I don't know. But if you're coming from a Christian context, the question is, what's my responsibility? And last month we had in Detroit, we had a mom who was sleeping in her car in a car garage because she was homeless. She had a 9-year-old and a 5-year-old, and she woke up and the 5-year-old froze to death in her car.
Oh, wow.
And so and I gathered with some of the different pastors in the area, and they're not even really in our area. They're an hour and a half away. But it was like we came to the Lord and we're like, God, forgive us for anything we could have done to prevent this. That's that famous confession of, Lord, forgive me for what I have done and what I've left undone. And those are kind of the undone situations of responsibility where, like, right now we've been in discussions with Salvation Army, Habitat for Humanity, all these different nonprofits that are in my local area. And everybody kind of has the same conclusion that the issue isn't we need more resources. The issue is we need the information to get out there of what's available. And that is kind of the thing, is like America is so much richer than every other country. Our poverty isn't really even poverty if you're taking advantage of what's already available to you. So like this mom, there were multiple shelters she could have gone to. There were multiple places that could have taken her in. There's multiple places that would have given her food and resources and things like that. The issue is either she doesn't know about these things, or or it's just she doesn't have the resources to get there. Or it's a shame. There's that shame factor, involved as well,
Do you think in her specific scenario, I don't know how this works exactly, but if you rock up to like a shelter because you have no food or no place to go with a 5 and 9-year-old, that she had to fear like CPS or somebody was going to take her kids away from her?
Yeah, maybe. I know from we adopted our youngest. I know from that experience that there's plenty of places in Detroit that will take in families, and I don't think you're at risk of losing your kid unless of course there's a major neglect happening. But because I just know personally the person that we are in relationship with, that she's not had those issues with her kids to our understanding. Obviously we're disconnected from that to a certain degree, so I don't, I'm not sure, but again, I think that the issue in the West is we have an abundance of everything, so much so that even, like Salvation Army, they have this thing where you go to it's called the Citadel it's their main place. You go there and you ask for certificates, and they say, what do you need? And you write down everything you need, and then you can go to the Salvation Army and get everything you need for free. That we have Habitat for Humanity that does the same thing, where you can go in, you can get furniture and things like that you need. And so there's so much resources out there for the poor that in our context, we're not in Sudan, we're not in Africa, where it's like, no, there's really just, they need the resources. They need some way, they need administration, they need some way to get these things to them. In our context, it's like, it's almost everywhere. The issue is we either don't know how to get there, or I know a big thing that I run into of hearing of drug addicts and stuff is I say, hey, well, why don't you go to this shelter? And they can't go to that shelter anymore because they went there and they blew up on everybody. They freaked out, and, and they're not welcome back. So some of it too is you just get kicked out and whatnot. But it is amazing to me as a pastor how many different stories I hear, because I'll hear someone say, oh yeah, this person's homeless. I'm like, that person's homeless and they have an F-150. And I'm like, whoa, it's like, and it's like they're homeless, but they have an F-150 and they have a job. And it's like our version of homeless is so different than everybody else, in third world countries. It's just so different.
Yeah. Well, again, like I think it's got exacerbated with social media, but there's been this perpetuation that, you deserve just to be wildly successful. And just like you have unlimited access to money and to funds. And I don't know, I think it just creates this weird discontentment inside of people that just didn't exist as much, at least in certainly our grandparents' generation. Obviously our parents' generation, like that's where the philosophy came in of the whole market is driven by greed, which I feel like that's a fallacy, but it certainly is a good marketing tool.
Yeah.
And people keep pushing that marketing tool. But my dad's take on it was, he said, of course we always want to help people. It's just been his observation that anytime anything is just given to people, it doesn't create gratitude seemingly. And most of the people he sees, it creates a new watermark or a baseline of entitlement. Well,
Yeah.
I've given this, and it's funny. Like you've done sales. Your last job, you were in sales, right?
Yeah.
So every sales organization I've been a part of has this weird dynamic of you could set a record, like as a group, you like break a record, and now that becomes the baseline. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
hey, yeah, we've never done over 100, but now we got 100. Now we have to do that every single time, and then it's like you get to like 150 or 200, and they're like, guys, we just figured out that we had all these limiting beliefs, and it's just like nothing
Yeah.
in nature really functions like this. Nothing else, and so I feel like.
Dude, that's the company I worked for. That is it. Is like you were terrified of hitting your goal at the end of the year because they would bump your goal a ton the next year. So like my best year ever, I hit it was 5 million of just that's straight profit, $5 million of profit. And then I get done with that year and I'm thinking, man, I just crushed it, awesome. And then my leaders come to me, and it's just so greedy. They come to me and they go, okay, you hit 5 million. What do you want to do this year? And I was like, 5 million. And they're like, no, it's got to be better. It's got to be, you have to grow. Like our core value is growth. I'm like, that's great for you. But like, when do we just say enough is enough for us, or at least for my contribution? So I was like, I'm doing 5 million. I don't care. There's this constant, well, we have to grow. That's what America does. We grow the budget, we grow the more. And I do want to say this, that even with everything I said about responsibility, I do want to say we have a responsibility to the poor. I don't want anybody to hear this and think, oh, I don't have a responsibility. We all have responsibility, but I think sometimes that responsibility looks like pointing someone in the direction of a place that is well equipped to do the thing. Because I've seen a lot of people or nonprofits or churches try to just be like, oh, well, we're going to do a homeless ministry. We're going to do a soup kitchen. We're going to do this. And we're just trying to do something that someone down the block is doing 10 times better. And it would be better to just send the funds that we want to contribute to their mission because they're doing it a ton better than us. And I think that's like the thing I see in my context is everybody's like, well, I want to do it. And then they want to be the one to spearhead it. But there's already somebody in the community just absolutely killing it, doing it perfectly. But the responsibility just needs to be the goal, not kind of that institutionalized, like I want to be recognized as the one who did it, and there's this like weird connection of I want to be known for this rather than just don't let your left hand know what your right hand's doing, from an organizational thing.
Yeah, I think like people misconstrue, like Paul said, be all things to all people, meaning like try to like get inside the head and the heart of other people around you and like empathize and have compassion for them. He didn't say be everything to everybody. And I feel like that's what people try to do is like, our church, we have the food pantry, we have this, and we're doing it on a really low level comparatively to what you just said of like somebody else who's like crushing it. And I've even had this, like we had a meeting, a group of people as in our fellowship, they were like, yeah, why don't we start this thing? And then someone's like, yeah, but they already did that. And I was like, well, if someone's already doing it, it's like way less energy and lift, and like you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Just go volunteer there. If you're the one who's saying like, let's do it, go volunteer there and just support what they're doing. Because it's just, to your point, if we just looked at our resources collectively in the cities that we're in, and just each individual fellowship has like a part to play in the city as a whole versus, I think like to your point, like I'm agreeing. Your church does something unique where you're talking to me about it, where you guys have a surplus board and then a needs board, and just make that like, that's part of what you were talking about before. Like people need to be aware of like resources they're there. You told me kind of a cool story about that, but maybe share a little bit about how that functions.
Yeah. So we, as a church, when we started, we said we are going to make sure we have a tithe of tithe structure. So everything that's given to our church, 10% of the tithe is put aside for the needs of the poor in the expansion of the gospel. Obviously it has to be like, it's like external, not internal. So we have that like structure in place to be like, okay, if you need help, we want to help you. I know a lot of what I said earlier made it sound like I was very resistant to helping. It's definitely it's the opposite. It's more so that's, I guess if there's anything I want to convey, it's the responsibility of being generous is exactly what you said, where there has to be this level of, I'm responsible for not only being generous, but also for the legacy that I'm bringing in the future. Kind of like that older generation where it's like, you know that at a certain point, it's irresponsible to do something that's going to affect the longevity of impact in the area. So anyway, so that's one thing we do. But then we just started this community exchange board is what we call it. We're 2 months into this, and you have a surplus side and you have the need side. If you have a need, anybody in our church can do it. You just walk up to the board, the cards are right there, and you say, I need a couch. That was the first item on it. And we had a couch. So the single mom, she had just basically moved out from her like fiance's house, is trying to, basically just kind of get her life oriented towards the Lord. And she's like, I'm moving out. I need a couch. So she puts it up there. I need a couch. So we're like, dude, we have a couch sitting in our barn that we'd just been sitting there. So we've got a couch. So it was like, okay, hey, we've got a couch. Come pick it up. Next person up, she just expected nothing to happen. She's like, I need large men's Depends for someone she was caring for, like like adult diapers. And she's expected that, like, there's no way anybody in our church is gonna need this. And then my mom and dad were like, dude, we've got a whole bunch of boxes of this from when we were taking care of my grandpa. And so they're like, hey, they connected with her, like, hey, we've got that for her. So within the same week, these little needs, they feel little, but it's all things in common, where it's like, oh, you have a need, I've got that. And then there's the surplus side, where if you just you're like, I just don't need this anymore. It's been sitting around. I'm trying to live a life of simplicity, of less consumeristic and more just enjoying to the fullest extent what I already have. So the surplus board, you just put up anything you have. So there's like end tables on there right now. There's vacuums, there's car seats that are brand new, and things like that. So any mom, any person who's just like, oh, I could really use that, they just walk up to the board and they see the person's number. They just text the person that is in our church, and then they connect and they swap. It's like Facebook Marketplace, but church-wise, I guess. So, so it's been really cool to see. We're very new into it, so there's definitely like, it'll be interesting to see. I'm sure we'll get some weird ones come up where it's like, I need an iPhone, or I need, like, who knows what, a sauna or an ice bath, whatever, who knows what could come up on there. So it's still very like, who knows what could happen with this, where it could get weird, but so far it's been really good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, that's, and I really like that when you shared that, because I'm just a very like practical person, and I just feel like having something like that in place, because a lot of times people are hoarders, like especially in our parents' generation more so. I feel like our generation, we've had to like move so much. A lot of us have had to move around, so we kind of you can't just take everything in the sink kitchen with you. So some people throw things in storage. I know people my age who've like moved around a lot and they just kept everything in storage in their hometown or whatever. But most people, there was a point in our life where we had 2 suitcases. That was literally it. Like, that's all we had. Like, I had a big suitcase. My wife had a big suitcase, and like, that was it. But, so being able to help people offload some of their hoard,
dude, for real,
is good. And you mentioned, like, we were talking a little bit about responsibility, and you were talking about not contributing basically into a culture to perpetuate it. We talked about generational poverty earlier. So I remember, like, when I was in Mozambique, one of the things that they strictly instructed us to do is never give anybody anything on the street, like never. Like, it's like, and they explained, like, this is literally the poorest country in the world. At one point, they had a 98% unemployment rate. Do not give anybody anything, because you're feeding into a beggar culture, and we're desperately trying to like break that culture. And so it was to the point where, like, literally, like, we had like these big water bottles, or just like a plastic water bottle, and you'd like drink it and it'd be finished, and then the kids would want the water bottle. Sometimes people would like fashion shoes out of it. Sometimes they would just like use it themselves, like, oh, they have now a plastic water bottle, they'll fill it up their house. and I'd have to say no. And then there's not like trash cans regularly there. So it's like a
Yeah.
third world country. So then I had to like fold it up in front of them, put it in my pocket, go walk and try to find a trash can later to put it in.
Wow.
But they were very adamant about us not giving anybody anything. And then there was, it was quite interesting because uh, they understood the psychology a little bit of Westerners, and so these kids would come up and they'd be like, brother, when I say kids, I mean like 5, 8, 10 years old,
Hmm.
kind of in this age bracket. And they'll come up and they say, brother, I'm so hungry. Give me some food, or brother, I like your, like if you had like swimming shorts or flip flops, whatever they like it. They were like, please give it to me. And then I'll be like, no, I'm not gonna give it to you. And they're like, then you're going to hell because yeah. And then they just quote
Wow.
the
So they
scripture
just
about
use it against you. Yeah.
if your brother has like doesn't have a shirt, give it to him, and like all this stuff. And there's this one kid named Tony, and Tony like he's a very charming kid. He wasn't like so abrasive like that. And I seen him get like sandals. Somebody went and got him sandals, and he would like show up with no shoes. He's like, I need sandals. And they got him sandals, like brand new sandals. And then like a couple of days later, I seen him like talking to somebody else, and they went and got him sandals. And I was like, Tony, what happened to your sandals? He's like, oh, brother, I'm so little that, people beat me up and they took my sandals. And I was like, okay. So we're walking through the village. Like, this is like weeks later. We're walking
He's
through the village.
selling the sandals, isn't
Bro, I kid you not. This kid had 28 pairs of sandals like
Wow.
lined up at his house. He was just hoarding sandals. And then someone said, yeah, it is a local scam where you'll go to the shoe guy and you'll buy it. And then he'll come back and he'll sell it back to the shoe guy at like a limited price. And
Yeah.
then they just like do that.
I can't
It's-
fault him for it though. I have
Bro,
a little bit of respect for that.
it was, I mean, these are,
Yeah.
it was an industrious mindset, but
Yeah.
it's like, there's some funny texts. I mean, with the shrewd, I have a guy who I'm friends with who he lives in New York, works on Wall Street, and we met each other in university and we stay in contact, but he really wrestles with the whole idea of money just in general and being a Christian. And he like talks to me all the time about this passage in Luke with the shrewd moneylender, the guy who like he knows he's going to lose his job, so he just starts forgiving everybody's debt, basically stealing from his boss, but his boss isn't even mad about it. And when Jesus is saying be as gentle as doves, but as wise as serpents. He's like basically like think like a snake, think like the devil, think like somebody who's trying to get over on you. But I just, anyways, my point with that was just that was a culture where actually trying to like just give people stuff is feeding into a few different things. One, it's like feeding into a savior complex of people who are like, oh, I'm coming and I'm helping all these people who are in defect below me or like they need my help. And then it's creating a psychology in these people of like, I can elicit things that I need from you if I just ask or maneuver you.
Yeah.
And I'm never going to figure out a way to like gain resources myself on my own merit or work or whatever it is. And it just perpetuates that situation.
Yeah.
And then it creates these weird kind of dichotomies there. And we see it like with my parents do. They used to have a food truck. Like they have the food truck where they deliver the meals like to shut-ins and people who can't get out. But they had a food truck where they would go and they open the back of it and they would just serve homeless people under the bridge. And there was like a shelter like you were describing where it's open 24/7, people can sleep there. Well, it's in the middle of the city and they had like a few like really hard situations, but they basically got to a point where they had to like explicitly say to every person, if there's anything you don't want from this food, tell us before we put it on the plate. Because once we put it on the plate, we can't, put it back.
Yeah.
Because they would just see people literally eat one thing off the plate and then throw an entire plate of food away right in front of them. Like the trash can's right by the truck. And so they kept telling people that. And one day there's a family, it was a dad, mom, and they had 3 kids. And the kids were like 10, 7, 5, something like that. And maybe it's a smaller one. 4th one. Well, the family did that. And then my mom, you just have to know my mom, she's like this small, frail lady. And everybody who's doing this is like completely volunteers. Like they don't get paid anything.
Yeah.
They're literally taking their weekend off to come and give you food. Well, the guy they threw the food away. The wife did, I think. And then they were like, hey, we said like, don't, tell us ahead of time because we can always take that food and deliver it to somebody else. Because we always run out every weekend, like,
Yeah.
and then the dad started like belligerently cussing at everybody in the truck saying, F you, blah, blah, blah. And then he took his plate of food and he threw it at them into the truck. So it was like all over my mom's face, all over everybody who's working there. And then he instructed all of his kids to throw their food into the truck. So they threw their food into the truck. And so everybody who's standing in line still waiting on food is like, oh snap, like what's going to happen now?
Yeah.
Well, now they can't serve any food because all of their food went into like the hot plates and stuff where that food is. So it's all contaminated.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was from the front of the truck to the back. Like it was on the windshield, everything. And so that was like kind of the final straw. Like, yeah, we just don't do this anymore. But the crazy thing is one of the ladies who volunteered on the truck is a substitute teacher. She's like in her 70s. She still substitute teach. One of the kids who did that was in a class that she was substitute teaching. And then he saw her and recognized her and then began to brag to all the other kids about what he did and what his family did. They still saw it as like, and like all the people in the line were ready to like tear them apart, the dad apart.
Yeah.
Cause he's like, you just screwed this up for us. And the people who run that, like, the shelter. So then the dynamic switch, like we're going to drop off the food. You guys serve it. Like, so that they didn't cut the resource off, but they're like, we're not going to stand there and have people throw food and cuss at us when we're literally like there. So again, so when people talk about, there is sometimes like a disconnect of like, when people talk about how a resource should be distributed, they're talking in the theoretical of other people's resources and other people's time and how it actually makes it to a person. And I saw a funny, thing where it was about immigration and it's about people like, we should just have open borders and let everybody in. And so the guys show up with a clipboard and like, fantastic, we agree with you.
Yes,
saw this. How many
rooms do you have?
How many rooms do you have? And the people are like, oh no, not in my house. And it's like, and like, or I have kids. They'd say, I have kids. Like, no, these guys love kids. It's perfect. Like we're going to send them to your place.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of thing is like, if people become critical of like, well, you should just give indiscriminately, it's like they're thinking in the same mindset of the people who don't have any relationship with where these funds come from. It's like, it's an infinite bucket that I need to pull out of.
Yeah. Well, and if you've never had the responsibility yourself to get your hands dirty, it's so much easier to just think somebody else will do it. And that is one huge problem that I've seen, specifically people that are like, the amount of times we've had situations where someone's like, oh, hey, this person needs a ride. Can you do it? And it's like, you already know they need a ride and you already have a car. Why don't you go get them? Like, what are you talking about? Why are you trying to find somebody else to go get them when you have a car? You have all the means you need to go get them. And it's like, it's so easy to pass off the responsibility to someone else and let the mess be somebody else's. But man, there's nuance to this too, though. Cause it's like the thing I struggle with the poor is I think we have a responsibility to proactively help the poor. We have a responsibility to be responsible with our resources. And then I also think from a gospel standpoint, we also have a responsibility to be taken advantage of. And I think that's something most people don't want to think about. But Jesus when he's talking to his disciples, he's like, hey, if somebody smacks you in the face, offer them the other one. Hey, if this Roman soldier who's literally colonizing your land, oppressing your people, probably murdering your people and stealing from your people, when he says, hey, carry my armor a mile, he's like, do it for 2 miles. And there's an element to the gospel of Jesus where he leads us into a proactive level of being taken advantage of, for the sake of grace, of showing unconditional love, that I actually don't care if you're taking advantage of us, and that's hard. That's hard to know when it's time to do that and when you're just enabling really bad behavior. And I think that's the line that we're always trying to balance, or the tightrope that we're trying to stand on, is when am I just enabling really bad behavior, but when is God calling me to be unconditional and indiscriminately generous to people? We went down to Charleston, South Carolina one year and found this guy named Damien. He was this drunk guy in this park, woke up. We were out in the morning in a morning stroll, woke up, and he's screaming in this park. He's like, his toes are coming out of his shoes. You can see his foot on the bottom of his shoe. And he just like, he slept in the park, probably drunk and whatnot. And Lydia and I were like, let's go take him out to breakfast. So we're like, hey, do you want to go out to breakfast with us? And he's like, wait, what? And we're like, yeah. Like, do you look hungry? You said you're hungry. Why don't we just go get breakfast? He's like, okay. So we went out and got breakfast, heard his story. He's telling us all kinds of different stuff. Half of it might not have even been true. He said he got hit by a car the night before, things like that. I'm like, I don't know that that's true, but sure. And then we just felt like led to take him and buy him some new sneakers and take him to CVS and get moisturizer and a toothbrush, toothpaste, a new sweatshirt, things like that. In every store we went into with him, they all acted like, oh, you're the next suckers who got roped into this. And every single one of them, they all looked at us like, dude, you guys are so dumb. Like, Damien's been doing this every day this week to a different tourist in town. And I just felt in my heart, it was like, I honestly don't care. I don't care if I'm being taken advantage of by Damien. I care that his stomach is full and he has warm clothes tonight. Because even if he is the worst person on planet Earth, or is just a drunk and can't get his life right, I will sleep better tonight knowing he is warm and has shoes to walk around on, And so it is just this back and forth of like just knowing when is the right time and when is it not the time. I would struggle so much in that Mozambique situation, because I would just feel, oh man, that would be so difficult, because I would just feel like I want to be obligated. I just want to be inconvenienced, but especially if they're using the Bible against me,
Yeah.
But I understand what you're saying, because that's real. If you don't learn to go provide for yourself, you'll just continue to wait for somebody else to do it for you, man.
Well,
Yeah.
they had resources for the people there. So it's just like literally like every day they're feeding 6,000 kids, and they have resources there to meet those kind of needs. But the kids they know, like, they want a Coca-Cola. They want, they want something more. And the thing is like we ate the food they ate while we were there. Like, for 4 months, I'm just eating rice and beans every day. There was no breakfast. They would give you these rolls that were like rock hard. You had to dip them in hot tea just to get them soft enough to eat them. And there was like little pieces of sand and rocks in them. So I had to be very careful that I didn't like chip a tooth when I'm like eating these. And then it's just a plate of rice and beans. And I dropped down. I was like 155 when I was there, because it was so hot. We're on the equator. So I was not like emaciated, but I mean, I went from like 185 to about 155. And I was eating like the rice and beans, every day, but still you just drop the weight. But,
how long were you there?
Just 4 months.
4 months.
Yeah.
Man, still.
But, they've been able to build hospitals. They've been able to build they have schools and things there. But I think, what you're talking about, that, or at least like I struggle with, this is probably the thing I struggle the most with. I can't say I struggle the most with, but it's something I struggle with is when Jesus talks about loving your enemies and people who do evil to you. I just honestly don't. I don't love. I know that, and I don't even know exactly what that looks like. But you're talking about, like, for example, the Roman soldier. That's your enemy. That person.
Your oppressor.
Yeah, they're crucifying people in your community outside of every single city that you're going to walk into. You're going to see people naked, dying, and decomposing because they just leave them there after the fact as a symbol to suppress any kind of resistance,
Yeah.
um, and to do any kind of favors for that person. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
I don't.
humiliating.
It's humiliating in a way. I guess like in a way it's liberating. I mean, I've seen that scene in The Chosen where Jesus is doing this and the disciples are losing their minds, and then the
Yeah.
Romans start getting like uncomfortable about it. Comparatively, I think the closest thing that I've probably seen to it, like on at scale, was I watched a movie about Gandhi, which obviously there's a lot of theatrical license that they take, but like about non-aggressive resistance, where they were like outside this gate, and the British people were like literally like striking them with like sticks. And like people would like fall down, they'd be bleeding, and they just stand back up. And then it just went on for hours, dude. And then when somebody was so damaged they couldn't take anymore, then the next row of people would just step up, and they just let them like until the
Ugh.
British soldiers were exhausted.
Yeah.
And then they eventually like liberated themselves like from that rule. But it was like a non-aggressive kind of resistance to tyranny in a sense. Um but yeah, that's something I struggle deeply with, and then I guess like in this time that we're living in, a lot of people have kind of, some people are moderates and they're in a flat land. They're kind of like disconnected in the sense of like, I don't really have an opinion about this stuff, to in the sense of like I want to avoid any like kind of big disagreement. But there is like an extremism that's like kind of pervasive in the West as a whole. I'd say like America, Canada, the UK,
Mhm.
where you have like people who are very, very, very much in like one of two camps, or like gravitating towards one side of that. Um, and some of that is just for show, but some of it, like I've dealt with clients in the past where, for example, when COVID was ramped up, that their family wouldn't meet together for Thanksgiving because they had a different viewpoint on who should be vaccinated and not
Yeah.
vaccinated. And then they were like, one part of the family, someone got vaccine injured and died like days after getting the vaccine. And then they were like, well, we're not going to do that. And their family's like, well, we all have been vaccinated. If you don't come, like, we're not going to, um, we're not going to have Thanksgiving together. And then both sides are saying like, you have to like look at the science of it. Like that became a
Yeah,
really
that
key
was
phrase
crazy.
of like, trust the science or look at the science. And it's so like basically in this extremism, like politically and whatever kind of issue it is, it's like, I have all the facts. No, I have all the facts. And we're trying to like reverse engineer the argument to either win somebody to our side or at least dunk on them on why they're inferior to our point. And I think like this is like one of many topics for that, of like how to address like poverty, how to address immigration, how to address um any issue. But it's became like pervasive even in the church, where we see denominations fracturing, like something like the
Yeah.
United Methodist Church, where you see like people are just like, I'm gonna, anyways. Yeah,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts on
It's the
that?
yeah, I think that the uh polarization, it comes from this absolute insistency that you have the moral high ground, that you're intellectually superior to whoever you're dealing with. And so that whole like arguing the science or whatever, you name it, even the generosity stuff that we're talking about, it's like you can take either side, but if you're not willing to have any nuance to a discussion that has it just has nuance to it, you're unwilling to hear the other perspective because you're completely insistent that you have the moral high ground and everybody else is just a buffoon. And I think that's the constant battle. It's the battle in the church too, of the United Methodists, of them saying like, this is the Bible is clear that this is what it says about gender identity. And the other half is like, dude, it's so black and white. It's right there. God made them male and female. And Paul is very clear about homosexuality and all these different, things. And yet it becomes such a point of debate that one side takes this moral superiority to say, I'm like, you don't care, you're an oppressor, because you're oppressing everybody else's truth. All of a sudden they've elevated themselves above everybody else. They've not allowed anybody else to have any kind of a conversation, because they're like, if you don't believe this, you're obviously a fascist, you're obviously a Nazi, you're obviously this. And so immediately you just categorize somebody. And I think that's the most unfortunate thing, is I think that when we don't allow each other to have this nuance, even in the sense of this conversation, where at the beginning of this conversation, I was kind of taking the angle of generosity, where people come in and take advantage of the church. And then towards the end, I'm ending it with, it's good for us to be taken advantage of. You know what I mean? And it's not that I'm trying to just never have convictions. It's no, I have convictions, but I'm also, each day, my responsibility is different unto the person in front of me. It depends, you know what I mean? And so I think that's the same. It's very similar with these issues we're dealing with in our culture right now, where we have intense distrust for anyone who has a differing view. And I think that's the biggest obstacle we have to fix, is this great distrust for someone who says, I disagree with you.
Yeah. Well, I have a friend, and he's a devout Catholic guy, and he's very, 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 very like liberal progressive on like across the board on his viewpoints. It's just like literally he just takes a script of like whatever CNN or whatever like news channel he's watching, and he just like verbatim like will like kind of parrot those. And there's like basically like I stay in friendship with him. Sometimes he says like just like he'll cuss me out, he'll cuss me out over Instagram, like say like crazy stuff to me, but then say, hey, anytime you're like in the area, like come to my house, we'll have a drink or eat something, whatever. But he's just like very like has very strong political. It's mostly like political stuff, not so much like the religiously where we're like in contention. Although he wants me to convert to the Catholic Church, but anyways, I just have like he has him and his wife have a ton of kids. I don't know how many kids they have, like 6 kids, 5, 6, 7 kids. I don't know. And
he's true Catholic then.
I said, how many kids are you going to have? He said, as many as God will let us. And but he loves his family. He loves his wife. And I've spent some time with them like together, and like his kids adore him, his wife and him. Like, so it's like on that level, like that's a really high core value of mine. Priority is like family and like, loving your family well. And so that's like kind of the point where we meet each other, and we're trying to like work out the best I can. I feel like sometimes it's a little bit more one-sided in the sense of like, I can make some concessions of like some things that I like about, if I look at church history and like the Catholic Church, there's some things that I would adopt or pull, but I can't swallow everything you're giving me, and I could walk through. And versus his side is like, this is the way, like all the way.
Every other way is wrong.
But I wrote a post once about like how empathy has become like a way. Like there's a maneuvering of like people's compassion and empathy and these like buttons within the Christian faith to like weaponize, kind of like what I said earlier about like, brother, give me your shirt. Oh, like the scripture says, if someone doesn't have a shirt, you don't give it to them, you're going to hell, that kind of stuff. So I just made the observation that that's been kind of weaponized. I witnessed this in Europe. It was the word tolerance. That's what they kept saying in Germany. You have to have tolerance. You have to have tolerance. You have to have tolerance. And I said, me having tolerance, like we can coexist together, but I can still say your idea sucks. Like, and I don't have to like say that your idea is good or right. And it was like, it again was this kind of one-sided thing of like, if I say, yeah, I believe in the resurrection of Jesus, that's dumb. But then it's
why is it the tolerant people are the least tolerant of other opinions
of certain opinions for sure. And so that's kind of like what I've I've tried to position myself in a place where if I disagree with somebody, that I'm being more inquisitive. My default though is sometimes I go into like explanation mode, or like if they present an idea, I'm very quick to like poke the holes in it.
Yeah.
But I've tried to like now become more like inquisitive and ask questions, suspend my bias, because we all have bias. So I need to suspend my bias, explore a little bit like what makes you actually tick and how you get there. But I've had like close friends of mine where, especially this last election cycle, they like got very, very emotional, like had a very visceral reaction. I was like, is our friendship compromised now of like 30
Yeah.
years because we have a different opinion or different perspective? Like, is that really, not from my end, but from your end? So it is a fascinating thing to try to like navigate this moral superiority that people feel on their position, and it's a hard thing if I'm pursuing, like if there's a hierarchy of what's good and what's right and what's true, and it's like the creator of everything exists sits on top of that, or there's something that sits on the top of that totem pole. Certainly the government or my political party is not the very top, because
Sure.
because if I look at video evidence of, like, for example, this is just an example of like Hillary Clinton or somebody like that who like 20 years ago says the exact opposite thing of what she's perpetuating now, that means that the moral element of this, like if we're talking about moral superiority, is very malleable depending on what the public opinion is at the time, like what's popular, or what do you think people want you to hear. So you're not really standing on your own belief, you're standing on what gives me the least amount of friction
Yeah.
or pushback. So it certainly can't be the state, and then it certainly can't be what I feel or think in the moment, because Ethan is Ethan now, but you're also Ethan that was a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old at one point. Like, you're a collective of those personalities. So if I go back to you as a 5-year-old and what you believed about money and what you believed about how to spend your time and whatever, that again is malleable depending on where you're at. So I can't really aim at that thing in the moment of what my desires are, whether that's my hunger or my sex drive or, whatever it is. Yeah. So I have to try to aim at something higher. And so if I'm aiming at something higher and I'm making the observation someone's not aiming high enough in that, how to like navigate that even within myself of like, I'm still a broken person. I'm still like have capacity for, like Paul said, of sinners. I'm the worst, in essence, is like how he's kind of positioned himself. But we're still like trying to pursue something higher. It's a weird thing to try and navigate. Go ahead.
Well, and it's like, it's seeking the common ground, you know what I mean? Where it's like, it's like finding that if you're like, we shouldn't have borders at all, no borders in America, you know what I mean? Then it's like, my common ground with you is the reason you're saying that is because you think America is great. And that's the reason why you want to welcome people in. I love that you want to welcome people in. I think that's awesome. I also want to welcome people into our country, but I also want people to come into our country and contribute to our country. Where I think where the conversation stops is when culture starts making blanket statements about everybody, where it's like, yeah, I voted red, but there's a lot in the conservative Republican Party I don't like. You know what I mean? There's a ton in it where I'm like, that does not represent, we pretend to be the Christian party, but there's a lot that isn't Christian in it. You know what I mean? And it's the same on the other side, where it's like there's a pretending, there's this feeling of we're morally superior to everybody else. It's like, you're not, like, because ultimately you blanket statement and you create this polarization between your tribe versus the other tribe. And so the only solution is to go to war with the other tribe. And instead it's like, one of the things, like when we were growing up, the big thing was green. Everything's got to be green, right? And we're not going to go into the Green New Deal, but it was like, protect the environment, protect the Amazon, protect the oceans. It was like, that was really big when I was growing up. It was like, protect the environment. I'm super thankful that even though the conservatives were all saying this is ridiculous, I'm super thankful that there's people in our world that are like, I want to protect the earth. and protect our oceans and our lakes and our national forests and things like that. Because if we didn't, it'd just be it's already bad, but it'd be way worse if we didn't have this like focus on it. And I think so often we swing so far, and we think like, well, I'm gonna fix the problem by swinging the pendulum all the way to the other side. And in reality, it's where do we have common ground, and where can we agree on something? But where I get triggered is I have a friend who sounds like your friend, where he says the most polarization blanket triggering statements ever. Like one of the things he was said to me was, all white people are racist. And I'm like, that's confusing for me, because I adopted my fourth son and he's black, and there's nothing in me that sees him as any different than all my other kids. And so how is every white person racist? You know? So those statements, that gets me fired up and angry really quick, because it's this huge, massive polarization statement that just is not, it's not true. Like there's not truth in that across the whole board. There might be truth in some sample groups, but it's not true across the whole board. So to me, what gets me going is when we start hearing blanket statements about the left or the right in our country. Like I get irritated even when in different contexts where Republicans are, even in my own family, are throwing out these huge blanket statements about Democrats, and Democrats are making these huge statements about Republicans. I'm like, guys, this is ridiculous. You know, it's just so, I'm definitely like when it comes to politics, I'm like, get me out of here. Cause I'm just like, I just get angry that everybody's throwing everybody else under the bus and nobody wants to just sit down and have a conversation, you know?
Yeah.
But
well, that guy who I was talking about, he just said, yeah, and this is a guy who like used to vote Republican, but he's like, yeah, the Republican Party is completely demonic. It's ran by the devil and blah, 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 blah. And then I hear people like, I come from a very like rural part of West Virginia where people are very conservative. So they'll say the exact same thing about the Democratic Party. And I'm just like, yeah, at the end of the day, like, I think like, to your point, you just have individuals that make up a collective, and there are like ideas that get perpetuated by the collective, but it is kind of wild, like yeah, just to hear like a very provocative statement. And I don't know, I can make very provocative statements like that about the history of the Catholic Church or something like that. I'm like, well, all Catholics are this because it's the history. Yeah. But it's just like not. It's
not true. There's so much. There's a lot of rich gifts and expressions and traditions that come from the Catholic faith that moved its way into Protestantism. And
yeah,
you know,
and people are people at the end of the day. Like there's individuals who anywhere you go, and so when you're sitting in front of somebody, you kind of have to reset. I think everybody does have bias. That's just going to be a natural ingrained thing. And I heard the podcast go down because you made the statement, or this guy made the statement of like all white people are racist, and I just find it interesting because I think anybody in any group is going to have a natural bias to some degree on some measure, depending on what they're conditioned with. But we have friends of ours who they immigrate here. The mom is Congolese, and then the kids are the dad was South African. They grew up in South Africa, and they just make the observation when they came here that in their school, the Black American kids will have nothing to do with the African kids, and then they make fun of them and pick on them because they stink and they're different and like all this stuff like they say, and it's just like, well, what is that thing? But I think like again, like you're just resetting every time you sit down with a person, and people are very complicated. And then circling back to what you said originally, even if somebody has these kind of biases or like says these things, how do I treat this person who's in front of me? Because if we go farther and farther and farther into extremism, it just you dehumanize another person, and then we get into a situation like we did in this country in the Civil War, where you literally had family members killing each other, and segmenting over political political views and both parties assuming moral superiority, communication just breaks down.
Well, it happens at such small levels, and then it happens at these massive levels. And I think that's where we can even bring this back to our generosity kind of giving thing. Is one of the ways that we can take that moral high ground is to say, well, the person's poor because they did drugs, because they're a drunk, they're this. And we take this like, I'm going to identify you by your problems, not by who, like God, that you're made in God's image, and that like there's a purpose and plan for your life. And so I'm not willing to just box you into that you're this because of this. I think that's where it's like we have to have this mindset of, I will not take this moral high ground above you. And that's where commonality comes into play, where you could be the richest. I truly believe Jesus is the example. He left the riches of heaven, left everything, all the inheritance, everything that he had in heaven. He comes down because he found something in common, and he puts on flesh and blood. And all of a sudden now God himself has something in common with us who are poor and blind and naked, and then he becomes crucified naked. And, and I think that's where, when we're talking generosity, when we're talking politics, it always comes back to this issue of commonality of I can't view you as less than me. I can't view you as something worse than me, because ultimately, if I was put in your situation with the parents you had and the upbringing you had, I probably would be right where you are. And so today, what's my responsibility for you? And it might be being generous and buying somebody a meal, or buying somebody a hotel, or helping somebody pay rent. Or it might be, here's a Dave Ramsey book, you should read this. Or it's, hey, I'll drive you to this shelter, or hey, go check this out. There's this nonprofit in town. I think that's where we have to take that responsibility and not just immediately divide ourselves and say, you're not like me, I'm not like you, but that's hard to do. It's hard to do. And especially in those situations when you've got people and dads who are throwing stuff into the food trucks of people who are literally trying to help them. And it's really hard to have mercy and grace for someone like that, who essentially is doing something, somebody's doing something out of the kindness of their heart, and they literally ruin it for everybody. That's a bummer. That is where the only thing I can say is I don't know what to do with that. That's where the justice in me comes out. And man,
I think, yeah, to your point, I think everything's just kind of nuanced in the situation. And I think it was like Ramsey, I heard him say once that, like, I don't own anything, I'm just stewarding what God gives me. And that's kind of how he looked at how he's saying he looked at his life and his resources. So if we posture even our life like that, the fact that our heart's still beating in our chest, because it could not be, the next beat, that you're going to try to use your life like that. But then there's a tension of, like, Jesus was never like a absolutist in a sense. Like he would, this passage where he's talking about not casting your pearls before swine. So it's like we would of course want, like, everybody to hear the gospel, or like hear truth, but he's just saying, like, don't even do that, because they're gonna trample the pearls into the mud like pigs, and then turn on you and, like, tear you to pieces. So there's like this nuance of and then also within himself, like, when that lady is trying to push through the crowd and grab a hold of him, you have to think, like, everybody had a need, everybody had something they wanted, everybody wanted a piece of him to a degree, and so just having, like, some discernment of, what am I supposed to give in this situation? I mean, that's like Baker's kind of deal. She's like, stop for the one. So it's just like, in the day, there's going to be somebody who, for divine providence, or like just through the everyday goings of life, that is going to cross your path. And like we're very objective oriented in Western culture, like getting from one thing to the next thing, but being people focused, like communal focused, and it not having to like make it be something of like I have to give you funds, but even like my daughter, we'll wrap up with this, but she we like have a habit of like a ritual of like where we pray in the mornings and the evenings, and then she understands like, you know, she'll pray for people if she sees that they're hurt. We went to the park to ride bikes, and her, you know, brother got the bikes out, and they're very excited. Well, there's people that walk on this flat pancake like paved path for like physical therapy and stuff, and there's a lady with these two walking sticks kind of going along, and it's probably like a football field length away, like on that far other side. And she just saw and saw. She's like, "What's wrong?" I was like, "Well, her leg's probably hurt. That's why she has that cane." And so then my daughter just like took off. And so then I'm like kind of lightly jogging after her, and she gets up to the lady, and I don't know what's getting ready to happen. And then she says to the lady, "Hey, can I?" She's like, "What happened to your leg?" And she's like, "Oh, I just got a surgery and it's hurt. Whatever. Da, da. Had an accident and then a surgery." And then my daughter's like, "Can I pray?" And the lady's like, "What?" And I was like, "She wants to pray for your leg. She's asking if she can." And the lady's like, "Yeah." And then my daughter, like, just unsolicited, like, puts her hand on her leg, and then just says like, "Jesus, make the pain go away."
Wow.
Something. And then she takes her hand off. Well, we look up, the lady's like crying, and she's like, "Thank you so much." And then my daughter's like, "Yeah." And then Chase from Paw Patrol did this and this and this and this, and then just runs away.
Yeah.
And the lady's like, "What?" And I was like, "I don't know. She's talking about Paw Patrol now, but
Yeah.
I hope that was okay." She's like, "Yeah." She's like, "I've never had anybody kind of approach me in public like that." And I was like, "Yeah, I mean, that's her IO. She'll do that with people." So it's not necessarily that people need like, you know, $100 or rhyme, but just seeing the person. And I feel
Mhm.
like my daughter's a lot better at that. To your point, like I feel like as the father and the husband, I have to protect our resources, and I have to, but that kind of comes from a sense of ownership. And so when Ramsey's saying like, all this is God, so I'm just like stewarding it,
Yes.
is a little
Yeah.
bit, that's hard, dude.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
hard.
Yep.
Well, cool. I know you say you have to wrap up here and take off. Is there anything you wanted to bring up, anything we talked about or didn't talk about, or you felt like you want to kind of wrap up with?
No, I think we pretty nailed it. Nailed it pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to hop on, man. And
Dude,
I'll
thanks for having me.
I'll drop the links and stuff to your church. Do you guys stream at all? Like
We
you
have
stream?
a YouTube channel. We just post our sermons after. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just post all those links
Oh,
in the
cool, dude.
description, everything, and then people
Thanks,
can
dude.
check it out. Yeah.
Yeah. This was a blast. Great conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Let's see here.
I've been thinking a lot about morality lately, not the kind that's trendy or convenient, but the kind that C.S. Lewis and Tolkien wrote about. The kind where you choose to do what's right, not because you're guaranteed to win, but because it's right. Period. Where you fight the battle knowing you might lose, knowing you might be killed, knowing that you might sacrifice even more than that, but you'll fight anyways. Because there's something sacred in that fight itself. There's a thread running through his stories where characters who resist evil not because they're sure of the outcome, but because their conscience won't let them do otherwise. And just when it all seems lost, some unexpected outside force breaks in. It's not always flashy, but it's enough. And as we look at the state of the world, the noise, the division, the weight of it all, it's attempting to think we're slipping past the point of return. But history runs in cycles. People have felt this before, and time again, small acts of courage carried out by ordinary people shifted the tide. I've heard so many times people said, I couldn't imagine raising kids in a world like this, but every generation says that. If today stirred something in you, frustration, hope, convictions, questions, great. That means you were listening and paying attention. And in a world that profits from distraction and division, staying oriented to what matters is a kind of quiet rebellion in of itself. Poverty, justice, truth, these are not topics that anybody's going to solve in one sitting. People have been trying to solve this forever, but maybe we're not meant to completely solve it. Maybe these questions are meant to be carried so that we know how to orientate ourselves and do that together. And maybe the win isn't having all the right answers. Maybe it's being the kind of person who just keeps asking the questions and refuses to stop seeing the person in front of them as more than just a problem or a position or a statistic. If this episode meant something to you, by all means, share it. Pass it on, start a conversation, consider that your assignment. And if you want to keep walking with us, subscribe, leave a review on Apple or Spotify, wherever you enjoy podcasts. Support the show if you'd like. It's not free. It helps me to keep building something that's thoughtful, unhurried, and grounded in real connection. Till next time, stay rooted, stay curious, and don't be afraid to carry something heavy. Bye-bye.